Now, today marks the 12th annual World Homeless Day, and although statistics are unreliable, the South African homeless population is estimated to be somewhere between 100 and 200,000 people. But in reality, these numbers are probably much higher. Homeless status is often met with negativity, discrimination and stigmatization. But experts say that the daily struggles many homeless individuals face are extremely complex, and more attention needs to be given to this invisible community. Jean-Paul Pophaim is a Criminology lecturer at the University of the Free State and joins me now via Zoom. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. I do think that this conversation is very important, especially because of what we mentioned in the introduction, that often a homeless status is met with negativity and discrimination. Perhaps speak to us about the statistics that we do have at hand and how serious the problem actually is.
Good evening, Heidi. Thank you for having me. The statistics are quite deceiving because the estimates are based on studies that have been conducted throughout the years or over the years. The problem is probably a lot worse than what we can imagine. At the beginning of this year, in February, there was an attempt to conduct a census around the homeless population. Statistics sort of estimate around 35,000 that were counted, but we do estimate it to be much more in terms of just the socioeconomic status of our country.
Sure. Why do you think, and if you are able to answer this, it's so difficult to get the accurate statistics around this?
Look, a lot of homeless people are transient in nature, meaning they move around quite often. So to locate them and to count them and to potentially recount them is quite possible. So I think that's part of the problem. And also a lot of them are absorbed into shelters and other sort of subpopulations. So the literature also speaks to female homeless individuals who are often sort of absorbed into prostitution, for example, and then they are not considered homeless to that extent. The definition of homelessness in itself is very complicated in terms of what exactly constitutes homelessness. So I think figuring out what homelessness actually is would be a starting point. Conducting more research, just understanding this complex phenomenon a bit more would obviously then help in terms of knowing exactly who should be counted and who should qualify as part of this population.
I want us to speak about how today marks the 12th annual World Homeless Day, and I ask this in the context of what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, where government was under immense pressure to, of course, get everybody locked up, as brutal as that sounds. But you often found that homeless people, when they were taken to perhaps a space of safety and not to be on the streets because nobody really knew what was happening with COVID-19, they often decided to leave that space of safety and they wanted to go back on the streets as they felt as though that was their safe space. Is that often what you find if you want to if you want to help homeless people and, perhaps change their environments? They're very reluctant about this.
It depends on the circumstances, really. I think a lot of the emphasis is also placed on this reunification process of getting homeless people back with their families or getting them into a group home or a shelter, for instance. But a lot of the times they are so sort of, in a sense, so used to the streets, and the street is there where they can sort of feel safe. And that is in itself very difficult to change, the lifestyle of where they feel safe and where they can sort of just find that sense of belonging. And a lot of the times it's hard to place them into these contexts. It's not really sustainable. And a lot of what was done during the COVID-19 pandemic was unfortunately not sustainable. A lot of people were placed in different centers or different parts of the country just to get them off the streets, as you said. And a lot of this just didn't last very long. And I think homeless people also sense that from a lot of the assistance that they receive, that a lot of people see them as just that, a burden. And that's probably why they also felt that they need to get back on the streets just to live life the way they used to. And that's also a very problematic thing to sort of realize, that homeless people do feel more comfortable on the street to a certain extent, that a lot of people can't even offer them what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, and the sad reality is that oftentimes a lot of homeless people, there's a lot of substance abuse at play. I must say that sometimes when I drive home and I see homeless people, if I think back to 6 months ago and I think back to how they are today, there's definitely a deterioration because a lot of them are involved in substance abuse. Just lastly, Jean-Paul, I want to speak about what society can do and what each individual can do to not ignore homeless people and to see if they can make a difference and help them in any kind of way. You know, often they'll come to your window and knock on your window, and because of what's the reality in this country of crime, we often just look away and not engage. But they are also people and they deserve to be seen. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, as I said previously, conducting more research, emphasizing the importance of social services and also shelters and stuff like that. Getting homeless people the help that they initially deserve in terms of their constitutional rights, treating them as human beings, having conversations like this a bit more often, generating awareness, and also just establishing that homeless people at the end of the day are just like you and I, human beings that have constitutional rights and they have needs that deserve to be met. I think that's the most important thing moving forward, in terms of just offering them that sense of a comfortable lifestyle with human dignity until the situation can be resolved. And as you might know, that the situation is very far from being resolved, but I mean, at least up until the point of it being sort of dealt with to a certain extent, at least just give them that human dignity and that constitutional right that I think every single individual is supposed to receive within the South African context.
Certainly, and just the respect. I mean, they're human after all. But thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. I think it's a very important discussion that's sometimes overlooked. That was criminology lecturer at the University of Free State, Jean-Paul Pophaim.